Texas is staring at a power request so large it barely sounds real. ERCOT, the operator of the Texas electric grid, says it has been tracking roughly 410 gigawatts of large load interconnection requests. Most of those requests are tied to data centers. That does not mean 410 gigawatts of new demand is already on the grid. It does not mean every project will be built. Some will move forward, some will be delayed, some may disappear. But the number is large enough to force a serious question. How does a state plan its power system when the requests coming in are enormous, the timelines are uncertain, and the costs could reach far beyond the companies asking for power? That is the problem now facing Texas. For decades, Texas has grown by adding more people, more homes, more businesses, more factories, and more energy demand. But this wave is different. A data center may not look dramatic from the outside. It can sit quietly on the edge of town, behind fencing and concrete walls, with no smokestacks and no obvious sign of how much electricity is moving through it. But electrically, it can be massive. Servers need power, cooling systems need power, backup systems need power, and when these facilities are built at industrial scale, they become a different kind of customer for the grid. The U.S. Energy Information Administration describes these projects as large flexible loads. In ERCOT system, that means a facility expected to use 75 megawatts or more at peak demand. That threshold matters because these are not ordinary electric customers. A household uses power in small, changing amounts. A store, office, or warehouse may use more. But a major data center, crypto mining site, or industrial facility can be large enough to affect grid planning itself. And in Texas, the list of these projects has been growing quickly. In 2025, ERCOT was tracking nearly 238.6 gigawatts of large load interconnection requests. By April 2026, that figure had risen to about 410 gigawatts. Again, those requests are not the same as real-time electricity demand. They are not finished buildings. They are not guaranteed load. They are requests that have to be studied, filtered, and tested against the physical limits of the grid. And that is where the pressure begins. The Texas grid has to plan for power plants, transmission lines, substations, reliability risks, and future demand. It cannot ignore serious new projects, but it also cannot build the system around every proposal as if each one will arrive exactly as planned. If Texas underestimates the demand that does become real, the grid could face tighter conditions, higher price pressure, and more difficult reliability challenges. If Texas overestimates that demand, customers could end up supporting infrastructure built for projects that never fully materialize. That is the central tension behind the headline. This is not simply a story about artificial intelligence needing more electricity. It is a story about a fast-moving digital economy pushing against a slower, physical power system. According to the EIA, electricity consumption is growing fastest in Texas, and large-scale computing facilities are a major reason. The agency expected large flexible load demand in ERCOT to reach 54 billion kilowatt-hours in 2025, nearly 60% higher than 2024. That would equal about 10% of ERCOT's electricity consumption. For one category of large customers, that is significant. But the request pipeline is far bigger than the near-term reality. ERCOT has reported that 7,500 megawatts of large load had been approved to energize since January 2022. Those are real projects entering the system. But that approved amount is still much smaller than the hundreds of gigawatts appearing in the request queue. That gap is the story. The requests are big enough to reshape planning. But the grid still has to determine which requests are real enough to build around. That decision is not easy. Electric grids do not scale overnight. A transmission line takes time. A substation takes time. New generation takes time. Permits, land, financing, engineering, equipment, and regulatory approvals all move at the speed of the physical world. Data center demand, by contrast, can appear on paper much faster than the infrastructure needed to serve it. That mismatch creates risk, build too slowly, and Texas may struggle to keep up with real growth. Build too aggressively, and customers may carry costs for assets that are not fully used. Texas has built much of its economic identity around expansion. The state attracts companies that need land, energy, infrastructure, and room to grow. That can bring investment. It can bring jobs. It can strengthen local tax bases, but growth also creates bills. Someone has to pay for transmission upgrades. Someone has to connect the load. Someone has to manage reliability risks. Someone has to decide how much of the cost belongs to the companies creating the demand and how much eventually reaches the broader system. For most families, this issue will never be described in terms of gigawatts or interconnection queues. It will be felt in simpler terms: the monthly electric bill, the ability to run air conditioning during a Texas summer, the confidence that a grocery store, school, factory, hospital, or small business can count on reliable power. The connection between a data center request and a household electric bill is not always direct. It is not always immediate, but it runs through the same grid. When demand grows quickly, the system needs more capacity, more planning, and more flexibility. Wholesale power prices can come under pressure. Infrastructure costs can rise. The EIA found that high-growth large load scenarios could raise ERCOT wholesale power prices compared with its base case, especially in summer. That does not mean every household will see a specific increase because of data centers. The path from a connection request to a monthly bill is more complicated than that. But large load growth does become part of the cost environment behind electricity. And for middle-class households already dealing with higher costs for housing, insurance, groceries, transportation, and debt, electricity is not just another expense. It is basic infrastructure for daily life. A family can delay a purchase. It can cut back on restaurants. It can cancel subscriptions. But in a Texas summer, power is not optional. That is why a grid planning issue can become a household issue. Businesses face the same pressure from a different angle. A manufacturer needs predictable energy costs. A grocery store needs refrigeration. A warehouse needs lighting and cooling. A hospital needs reliability. A school district has to budget for utilities. When very large new customers enter the system, they may bring economic benefits. But they also compete for grid capacity. The question is not whether growth is good or bad. The question is whether the grid can absorb that growth without shifting too much risk onto everyone else. Texas is not the only place facing this. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation has identified rising demand and large load growth as reliability concerns across North America. But Texas is one of the clearest test cases. The numbers are large, the growth is fast. The weather risk is obvious, and the state's power market is watched closely because so much depends on reliable electricity during extreme heat. There is also another reliability concern that is less obvious. The risk is not only that large facilities use a lot of power. It is also what happens when they suddenly stop using it. Reuters reported in June 2026 that ERCOT had flagged risks after several large data centers and crypto sites failed voltage disturbance tests. According to that reporting, some groups could each cause more than 5,000 megawatts of abrupt demand loss under certain fault conditions. That sounds technical, but the basic idea is simple. The electric grid has to balance supply and demand at every moment. Most people imagine grid trouble as a shortage, too much demand, not enough supply. But sudden changes in demand can also create instability. If a huge block of load disconnects unexpectedly, the grid still has to keep frequency and voltage under control. At a small scale, this is routine. At a very large scale, it becomes a serious planning issue. That is why data centers and similar facilities are not just customers in the old sense. At enough scale, their behavior becomes part of grid reliability. This puts Texas regulators and planners in a difficult position. The state wants investment, it wants data centers. It wants a role in the AI economy. It wants new business activity and the tax base that can come with it. But the grid needs certainty. Which projects have financing? Which have land? Which have realistic timelines? Which are serious enough to plan around? And which are simply holding a place in line? That distinction matters. Developers may explore multiple locations. Companies may request more capacity than they eventually use. Projects may change, pause, or disappear. That happens in business all the time. But on the power grid, inflated expectations can distort real planning. The grid has to prepare for physics, not optimism. That is why the 410 gigawatt figure should be handled carefully. It is not a forecast that all of that demand is coming. It is not proof that Texas is about to run out of power. It is a signal that the planning system is being tested by a demand pipeline far larger than ordinary customers would recognize. Several paths are possible. Many requests may fall away. Some projects may never secure financing, power contracts, land, or equipment. If that happens, the headline number could shrink, and the real grid impact could be much smaller than the queue suggests. A smaller but still significant share could move forward. That would still require serious planning, more grid infrastructure, more generation, and tighter coordination among large customers, regulators, utilities, and ERCOT. Texas could also become more selective, asking for stronger proof that projects are real before they move deeper into the process. That could help separate serious demand from speculative demand. Reliability standards for very large loads could also become more important, especially around voltage disturbances and sudden disconnection risks. None of these choices is painless. If the rules are too strict, Texas could slow investment. If the rules are too loose, the grid could absorb too much uncertainty. If infrastructure is built too late, reliability and prices could suffer. If it is built too early, customers may pay for capacity that is not fully needed. That is the hard part of the AI power boom. The digital economy moves quickly, the electric grid does not. A data center can be announced quickly, demand can appear in a planning queue almost overnight. But the system behind it still depends on steel, copper, transformers, land, transmission corridors, fuel, engineering, and time. The internet may feel weightless, the grid is not. Every cloud platform, every AI tool, every server rack depends on a system that has to work second by second, day after day, summer after summer. Texas is now being forced to answer a question other states may soon face as well. How much future demand should a grid prepare for when the requests are enormous, the timelines are uncertain, and the costs may reach beyond the companies making those requests? That is why this story matters. It is not just about Texas. It is not just about data centers. And it is not only about artificial intelligence. It is about what happens when a fast digital economy asks a physical power system to move faster than it was built to move. For households, the pressure may appear in electric costs. For businesses, it may appear in competition for reliable power. For regulators, it becomes a question of fairness. For the grid, it becomes a question of stability. And for the country, it is a preview of a larger problem. The future may be digital, but it still runs through power lines. And Texas is now learning that the biggest request is not just for electricity, it is for certainty.